Welcome to this NIE Care Online Dialogue, and hello. My name is Charlene Rajendran. I'm part of the drama team in the Visual and Performing Arts Department at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. The NIE Centre for Arts Research in Education or CARE is a research centre based in the Visual and Performing Arts Department, which generates, collects, and disseminates high-quality research that promotes education in and through the arts. In this series of dialogues with applied theatre and drama education scholars and practitioners, we will explore questions that deal with the importance of the arts in developing justice, hope, and creativity. We will also consider what it takes to engage meaningfully with difference and change. The speakers, Selina Busby, Kelly Freebody, and Molly Mullen, are internationally renowned thinkers and leaders in the field of applied theatre and drama education. They explore ideas about how to deepen scholarship and enrich art making in varied sectors of community and across boundaries of culture and vocation. They collaborate with multiple stakeholders in their research and practice, generating interdisciplinary approaches that spearhead how the arts, especially drama, enhances socio-emotional literacy, criticality, and well-being. In these dialogues, they articulate some of the primary motivations for their work, specific areas of focus, and emerging questions about what else is needed in the field. They offer valuable research frameworks and examples from their practice about some challenges and opportunities of working in multimodal and intercultural spheres. We invite you to listen to the dialogues with the individual speakers, as well as a joint dialogue where we explore ideas that emerged in conversation and warrant more attention. We hope this will offer a valuable resource in your work as a scholar, educator, student, practitioner, and audience member. Now on to the dialogue with Selina Busby, who is Professor of Applied and Social Theatre at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London, England. Selina's research and practice focus on theatre that invites the possibility of change, both in contemporary plays and in participatory performance. As a practitioner, she works in prison settings, youth theatres, and with young people living in adverse conditions both in the UK and internationally, including projects in India, Kenya, Chile, and the USA. Her monograph, Applied Theatre, A Pedagogy of Utopia, published in 2021, theorizes her practice and the ethics which have underpinned her work in over 25 years of working in applied theatre contexts. She is co-editor of Research in Drama Education, the Journal of Applied Theatre and Performance, otherwise known as RIDE, and has delivered multiple keynotes and lectures globally. I've had the pleasure of working with Selina on a co-edited publication titled The Routledge Companion to Theatre and Young People, and enjoyed conversations with her about what it takes to engage in purposeful art making while navigating through multiple challenges that stem from political, cultural, and social changes, the kinds that impede support for the arts and discourage arts practitioners and educators. Selina's work inspires deep reflection on how to think, feel, and sense deeply what is at stake when in collaboration with people who are from varied backgrounds, while working through unfamiliar cultural norms and values. Thank you very much, Selina, for taking time to share your thoughts with us and examine ideas that are critical in your research and practice. Okay, Selina, you've been working on this idea of utopia, and in your book and in your thinking and in your research, and in today's world especially, which heralds so much dystopian possibility, what is it to work with this idea of utopia, and what's utopia for you?
That's a really difficult but joyous question to be asked. It's a slippery, I think I say it in the book, it's a slippery term that means different things to different people. I guess for me, It's a concept that stays with me. I think you're right. I think the world is day by day feeling like it's more in crisis, or it's in a state of polycrisis. And that sense of hope that's at the roots of utopia is really important to me. I guess to answer your question more directly, for me, a sense of utopia isn't just a kind of random airy-fairy imagination of what could be, but it's an exploration of what really exists in people's lives, so their day-to-day experiences, the realities that they're living, and to be able to stand aside from those in a moment and critically reflect on where they are, what's happening to them, what's happening in the world around them, and be able to think of, create through drama, imaginative fictions of what could be, not fictions as in a mapped out way, but really rooted in everyday problems, and whether they're small scale problems or large infrastructure problems or conceptual problems, ideological problems, and think, well, okay, if this is where we are, what could be different? What questions could we ask that might lead us to different places or different answers? What could we do to positively, for the people involved in that exploration, do to make small shifts or large shifts to the way they think, to their experiences? And I think theatre or drama is a way of engaging the imagination to allow people to step out of that everyday overwhelmingness of what we face today, and potentially think about possibilities of what the future might look like in a different way.
That's really interesting what you say about critically imagining things through the drama, and not just talking about it, but actually finding these stories, these moments through the realities of everyday life.
Yeah.
Can you speak a bit more about what you've experienced when it happens and how it happens?
Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a really specific example. I think right at the end of the book, I talk about a project based in Worli Kolliwada in India, which is a small urban village on the outskirts of Mumbai on the coast. And that project, I think I spend maybe 2 or 3 pages on it right at the end of the book, but actually it's become really important to the way I think about space, the way I think about what drama does for people, and how utopia might work. So the women that we worked on in that project live quite isolated lives. They live in an informal housing settlement where from the outside it looks like everybody is living cheek by jowl, very, very close to each other, and they are, and with very poor infrastructure on every possible level, and that's all true. But at the same time, the women who live in that community are really isolated from each other and the rest of the community because of a whole range of cultural differences and the impact on their lives that mean that they don't really leave their houses very much. They're very, very small houses or living spaces unless they've got somewhere specific to be. So they don't meet as a group of women. They don't have very many moments in their lives where they meet neighbours, where they just hang out. And working on a project with them to create a piece of drama. We didn't know what it was going to look at to start with. We had a feeling it might be about space because my partners that I work with in India had done preliminary work and workshops with them, and they knew that space was that the women felt they had no physical space and also no mental space. So space on every level. So we thought that the work might end up being about that, and it was very within 5 minutes of being in a room and doing some very basic drama exercises. Drama exercises is a horrible word. Doing some creative work around what issues were important to them. I mean, we don't ask that as a direct question, but through indirect creative ways. And nearly every single one of them highlighted space as a problem, and particularly outside spaces. And so through a convoluted set of workshops and practices, they decided they wanted to make a piece of drama about their lack of space, or spatial injustice, and they wanted to do it outside in spaces that not hanging out in on a normal everyday basis, and aren't really. It's not like a ban, you cannot be in this space, but effectively the pressures, societal pressures, mean that they can't be. And we came together in all women's spaces, which was quite problematic actually, because most of my partners that I work with in India, my co-directors and co-researchers are men, and they weren't allowed in the room. And my Hindi and Marathi is really not very good. So women-only spaces, to carve out a space of what a woman-only space might look like. We spent in the first year doing that. And what happened in those spaces is that the women, through a whole range of ways, decided they wanted that space, which in my head was a drama space, but they wanted it to be a partying space where they could do what they wanted, talk about what they wanted, play games, sing songs, do Bollywood dances, and share food. And so for the first year, that's pretty much what we did. There were drama games, there were still images and tableaus and small scale improvisations. And then when we were back the following year, they were like, no, we want to do this outside. This space has been great, we really like this space, but let's go outside. And the thing that hits me about all of that is that we ended up making a very short piece of theatre, maybe 7 or 8 minutes long. Some people wouldn't even describe it as theatre. A series of short scenes, most in mime, really, non-speaking scenes that explored what they used, how they were allowed to use the very lane we were standing in when they were small children, and how they would play in it and run in it and do hopscotch or whatever the games they're playing, how they use it now, which is not as a thoroughfare to deliver food to people, to clean spaces, to get to take children somewhere, and how they'd like to use it in the future. And so that sounds very linear. It wasn't performed in a very linear way, but the impact of that work on me was that the women were tussling with some very difficult circumstances. There was a lot of anger in the room about their lack of space, the power imbalances in their lives, and how they wanted to communicate that to safely communicate that to their communities and the authorities in that community space. And I remember all of that very, very clearly, viscerally, the anger and the need. But what hits me more viscerally is the memories of the joy in the room as they took over those spaces, of the joy that they experienced of playing together as women, of talking together as women, singing, laughing, all of that stuff. And so those two poles, and they feel like poles, but they're really not. They're absolutely entwined, of intense anger, a set of circumstances that people can't change, and the immense joy that can be experienced by talking about those in a creative way, and sometimes not a creative way, of playing with those ideas, of coming together, of concentrating very hard on something. The joy of being able to spend 20 minutes creating a freeze frame that is exactly the way they want it to look, and so it's communicating exactly what they want it to communicate. The intense concentration that takes, there's a kind of joy involved in that, as well as the raucous, explosive joy of how they feel when they've done that scene and when they've got it right, or of when they're doing a Bollywood dance. So those two poles of absolute joy and the anger meeting in a space have become really interesting to me, I guess. And so in thinking about that project 5 years later, I'm now kind of taking those two poles into nearly all of the research and all of the thinking that I do, because I think on different scales and in different levels, I think that might be one of the things that, whether we call it applied theatre or community drama, but working to create theatre with community groups, I think it's a commonality in a lot of the work that I look at, whether that's with young people who are marginalised in inner cities, whether it's with rural communities, whether it's with in the UK, whether it's with women in Worli Kollywater, whether it's with the New York police force and community groups in New York coming together to make drama. I think those two poles are very powerful in creating work for audiences. I've gone off on a complete tangent. I don't think I've really answered your question. So, and I think they're both key to the utopian aspect. I guess to come back to your question is, it would be very easy to wallow in the anger. It would be very easy to look at the dystopian futures that we can all see from where we stand at the moment. But those moments of joy work as a puncture in that, I think. And I think joy has become more important to me in the work and in my research as the world feels like it gets closer and narrower and more conflictual, and as the poly crisis close in on us all in different ways, I think the joy becomes more and more important. And so it's a key part of utopia, which I wouldn't have said when I was writing the book, because I just hadn't, I guess the world has changed a lot since then, but also I was focused on pedagogy, I was focused on the concept of applied theatre and what that might do. And I think now when I look back, the joy and the utopia that is a route to utopian imaginaries, I think.
Yeah, no, I really like the example that you're giving, because this spatial question, the spatial injustice, to use your phrase,
Yeah.
is key to then the importance of people coming together. And
Yeah.
here, the women coming together and
Yeah.
being able to be together over
Yeah.
time is what you
Mhm.
have been pointing to.
Yeah.
And so this social dimension, relational dimension, that is key to making drama in any context, and to being able to participate in that creative work, and therefore have the party, inverted commas, beyond just the dancing and the
Yeah.
food and the drink, but the
Yeah.
party of gathering, right? Just
Yes.
becoming a
And
party.
yes, and so I more recently thinking about joy as resistance. And actually, to take the party is resistance. It's a political resistance. If you're in a space where you're not allowed to party, or you feel that you can't, then it becomes an act of resistance to go, I'm going to hang out with these women and we're going to sing, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah. And we forget, I think, too often when we think about political parties.
Yeah, that's a whole other
Yeah.
thing.
I don't know the origins of the word in terms of why they were called political parties, but I imagine that somewhere along the line, people coming together
Yeah.
and enjoying each other's company, but also coming together because of a certain solidarity, communitas,
Yes.
community, whatever the words are.
Yes.
But the gathering, and nowadays sometimes the word the assembling, right?
Yes.
Becoming
Yes. Yes.
laced with all kinds of deeper intentions. I just wanted to ask about how then they are listening to each other, and you're listening to them, for this work to then not just be about people coming together and they're individuals,
Yeah.
but eventually connecting through that kind of listening.
Yeah, in the Utopia book, I talk about it. I talk about that as partly as creating a third space, as Edward Soja and various other academics would have talked about. But creating a space, a third space for me is an opportunity to bring people together from different spaces, different backgrounds, even if three-quarters of the community come from the same physical geographical location but aren't in the same space together very often, about how you bring people together as equally as you possibly can within that space. There's a lot of stuff talked about in applied theatre and drama education about safe spaces. Don't particularly like that term. I don't think any space is safe for everybody in that room. It can never be equal for everybody on the same footing. And I think an awareness of that in a drama space is really important, that you create a space where where we can try to have non-hierarchical conversations and listen to each other, but it's actually quite hard to achieve, because there will always be the people in that space who have that edge more power, that edge more confidence, and can take over that space. More and more I've been, again, in the last 2-3 years, I've been thinking about, and Whirly Collywater again is a launch pad for this, is thinking about not only spatial justice, but cognitive justice. And which is, again, D'Souza and there's Vanthan, and I'm probably not pronouncing his name properly, which is appalling of me. But I've never heard it. I've only seen it written down. Both talk about cognitive justice in different ways, and as a wider society, historically, we haven't treated all respected all forms of knowledge and knowledge formation and dissemination equally. And so, for example, the women in Worley Colleywater would not be considered to be very knowledgeable by some people because they don't write down what they think or what they say, or they haven't had traditional academic backgrounds in the way that we think about them, academic backgrounds in the global north. But their experiences are as valuable as somebody who's sat down and read books. And certainly when you're talking about political resistance and marginalized groups, the knowledges and lived experiences, which is a weird expression, all experiences are lived, surely, but lived experiences are valuable knowledge. And there's a part of the drama process for me that is about wrong word, about inviting people into a space where they feel that their knowledges and their experiences and their words as they speak them are as important as anybody else's in that room. And so listening is a vital part of that process, whether it's me listening to the women, whether it's the women listening to each other, whether it's my partner, director partner, Divya Bhate in India, listening. That listening is really the key. I haven't really theorized listening, and I know lots of people have, but that is what I mean when I talk about both cognitive justice in some extent and spatial justice sort of combined. So there's a space that you bring people together to listen to each other, and that is most definitely the first stage of it. I'm not being very theoretical in my response to this question, but and how I do that as an outsider and as in many of the contexts that I'm working in, a white university professor working in a global majority environment, means that my job is to listen, not to speak, not to direct. I very rarely direct when we're creating a piece of theatre, because when I'm working in a place of colonial power, the last thing we need for me to be doing is being a white woman giving instructions. So I don't do that. It's for the community or the women that we're working with to be to some extent directing where the work goes, how they do that. And I am there not as a listener either. It's a really complex thing to describe, because I don't just sit in the back of the room and take notes. I very rarely take notes. I'm very much part of that community in a project that I can have some decision-making processes about, which we don't always get, but I will be a co-researcher, a co-creator with the women concerned, and that takes time. The work with Worley Colleywater took a 5-year span. The work in that region of India has taken now a 23-year span. It involves me having conversations about mother-in-laws with the women that I'm working with. It involves us comparing piercings. It involves us talking about nail varnish. I will never be part of that community, but in those spaces, it's really important that I can have those conversations about mother-in-laws and nail varnish, because that is building a connection. And so a lot of time, in a recent article, I've talked about that as being deep hanging out, which is an ethnographical term, sometimes taken seriously, sometimes not taken seriously. But for me, it's a key part of the work, because if I don't listen to that community that I'm working with, whether it's a group of 14-year-olds in London or the women of Worley Colleywater, if I'm not listening to them and I'm not having conversations with them, I will remain an outsider, and the work will be less strong because of it. There's something about my work is rooted in people and theatre making. The research is there, but it's often in the background in the moment. And listening is the only way to do that. A lot of I called them drama exercises earlier, and they went, oh, that's a horrible expression. But a lot of the early stages of the work are about listening. What do the people want to talk about? What can we do a gentle drama activity that allows them to talk about what's the top thought in their heads at that moment. And that top thought might be, and I'll use Worley Colleywater as a really specific example. For some of the women, when we started doing that sort of work together, the top thought was, how do I get my son off his mobile phone? We all recognize that.
Tough question.
Well, yeah. For some of them, it was, what are we going to do about water shortages? For some of them, it was, I can't access medical care. For some of them, it was, I just want to sit in the street. For some of them, it was, much more trivial. What am I going to cook for tea today?
Mm.
All of that is fine, but if you don't listen to those thoughts through drama, as tableaus often, or very simple pieces of drama, listening to those and how they've created those and what they decide in a group of, I don't know, 5 or 6, if they've got common themes of the things that came to the top of their head first, then that's what they'll work on that day, and then they'll perform that to the rest of the group. And so we're constantly doing layering of listening to each other to work out what are the themes and issues that they might want to focus on as a whole group. And if you're not listening and you're not embedded in that community in some shape, way or form, then you can't listen and you can't hear those nuances. And so I speak very little. To go back to your listening question, I speak very little. I listen a lot. And I think that's the key. Also, I think sometimes the people I work with aren't listened to.
Yeah.
They have voices, they use their voices, but there is no one to listen to those voices, or the perception for them is that nobody listens to their voices. And I said that's exactly the same with 14-year-olds in London. And so listening and me being quiet in the room and my co-director being quiet in the room is the first act of cognitive justice. It's what you have in your head is as important as what anybody else has in their head. Let's hear it.
You seem to be describing what is a listening presence, this deep hanging out in which the listening presence that you are generating is its own particular energy, perhaps, that you are inviting, to use the word that you went to. These multiple voices with different kinds of concerns, from what do I cook to how do I get medical care, not placing them on a hierarchy, as you said, but acknowledging that they are important and therefore legitimate in that space. And the cognitive injustice, working towards cognitive justice, in this storytelling space, in this space where the ideas come through the stories that are shared, and the ideas are then translated into stories that they want to share with other people who come into it.
Or not share.
Or not share. It's just
sometimes
for
the stories don't. Sometimes it's just for us in the room, which is equally important.
Yeah. And being able to acknowledge story as more than just information, because it's not about just bits of data. It's something deeper. How do you work with the idea of story when you're thinking about and responding in your listening capacity?
It's a really good question. There's a really good, it's not a very academic word, is it? A really intelligent, interesting writer in the UK called Clark Baum, who works in areas of criminal justice. Was one of the original founders of Geese Theatre, who work with people who have experience in the criminal justice system. He's written this really brilliant book about how it's really dangerous to work with people's real stories and real experiences, so that you to not re-traumatize people. I'm putting words in his mouth, I'm paraphrasing quite badly. And he says there's a very gentle and soft way that you can follow a spiral to go from not talking about people's own experiences, and work your way gently and slowly into the center where you might be able to talk about people's real experiences through drama. I love his ideas. I love the way he writes about it, and I would 100% agree with him until I'm in a room. And then when I'm in a room with people, they want to tell their stories often. They want to tell the stories of what happened to them yesterday, what happened to them on the way to the workshop space, what happened to them last week, what happened when they went to the police station, or whatever it might be. And we all make sense of our lives through the stories we tell. We process things, I think, and we decide, we author our own, the way we talk about the experiences we've been through. And sometimes the people that I work through have done that process, and they've absolutely authored the story that they're telling, and you can tell that they've told it many times before. Other times, there's something about a drama room and the improvisation and devising process and the playing and the laughter that allows people to tell stories that they might not have told before. And sometimes we'll disguise those stories and make composite characters of all the people in the room to create something. But more often than not, the work starts from the stories that people want to tell about the things that are important to them. And so storytelling it's innate and it comes from the people in the room, but there is an element, I guess, of crafting that for a performance sometimes. So I guess the way that Divya and I, when we first started talking together about whether we wanted to start this crazy journey of work in India, was very much about what can the exchange be? What can theatre makers or academics and researchers offer to a community group, and what can the community group offer back to us? And I think part of that exchange is that Divya brings a theatre director's background and can craft stories, craft stories into compelling narrative, actually using very little words, because we quite often work with very few words. And so that's the skill that Divya brings into that room. He doesn't have this, he's from India, he's from Mumbai, he doesn't have the same lived experiences as the women of Worli Kolliwater, but that's the skill he brings. There's a real craft in being able to listen to the stories that the community tell, the stories that are important to them and that they want to explore, and then crafting that without them feeling that you've taken it away from them and you've put it into your words and you've rechanged it. That's what we all aim to do, maybe. Well, not all, but it's actually a very tricky thing to do. And so there's a craft to the storytelling that gets layered over. I can't describe it in a very articulate way, I don't think, but it's a really important part of the process that at the end of even though it's been crafted into a theatre performance, that every single participant for the work that a lot of the work that I do and then we do in India, can recognize themselves in that story, can recognize the parts of them that are in that, and not feel that we've taken it away from them, we've taken it out of their hands, that we've rewritten it. And that process is very slow. And so the storytelling is vital from every perspective of that. It's the community, individuals within the community story. It's the story of a community, and then it has to have a theatrical polish, for want of a better word at the moment, that allows that story to be accessible to people who weren't in that room in the creating of it, who weren't, who perhaps aren't living in that community or are living in that community. And so the storytelling happens in different layers and different ways, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense, especially what you say about time. Because there's sometimes this horrible assumption that you can do this in 3 hours or you can do this in 3 days.
No.
Yes.
No.
And from the relational capacities and the building of relationships, which takes time, trust, understanding, vocabulary, language, craft, etc., familiarization, but also the time to allow what you're discussing, in which the artistry, the craft, can get embodied and therefore can get owned and can therefore feel very much part of what people are sensing as having come from them, and then being allowed to go through a process and then come back.
I think part of the way is also, though, to make that process as transparent as you can. So it's not the case of it's ever done out of the room, it's all done in the room. So that quite often, whether it's a tableau or a fully fledged scene, will be performed to the rest of the group. And the first port of call is to turn to the rest of the community, or if we're talking about Worli Kolliwater still, the women in the room, and go, what did you think? What did you see? What would you change? What would you shift? So still it's a co-devising process, and hopefully a process that edges towards some kind of cognitive justice, so that even the community's opinion on the theatre making is as important as their lived experiences going into that theatre making. So by the end of the process, they'll be like, oh no, you had your back to us, you can't do that, you need to shift that or change that, or we could see that you were aiming to communicate joy in that moment, but we didn't get a sense of the joy from your performance. So they themselves will tweak the performance. So the ownership, we're talking about ownership, I guess, of the project Divya is most definitely the director, but he doesn't own the project. I often come with the funding and as the researcher, and there's the Divya's co-director sometimes, but we don't own the room, we don't own the space, we don't own the work that's made in that space. It's very as far as we can, the women take as much ownership over what is performed and the way it's performed, but gently and slowly over time. Divya has passed his craft to them, some of his craft, so that they have a critical eye on the performance as well as the content.
Yeah.
But time is 3 hours. No.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this commitment to time, in order that process of sharing skills, being part of each other's learning, which you pointed to earlier, and recognizing that the co-creator, co-authorship then enables the aspiration of that utopian justice to be made real rather than just talked about and just put in a proposal, because then there are concrete moments where that to and fro, the reciprocal meaning making is taking place.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, that's the aim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to go back to the idea of joy as resistance then, right?
Yeah.
In this, I mean, this is another kind of resistance, to take time and to invest in time, and therefore allow the party of enjoyment to be as important as the process of making the theatre. I think when there's no time, you can't invest in those processes.
I've recently been involved in 2 projects. One very recently, one a couple of years back, where I was asked in various different ways by other researchers from other disciplines to distill what I do in a room into a toolkit that I could hand over to, let's randomly say, a group of social workers who could then deliver the work. And I was just, how long have I got with the social workers? Oh, you won't see the social workers. Can you produce it as a literally as a toolkit, but you can hand over? I was like, I can't, because I can give them a set of exercises, but that is not the same thing as understanding how that works in the room, and it's a people to people process that takes time. It takes time with so the social workers would need time with the specific community that they were working with, and I would need time, or whoever, it doesn't have to be me, whoever would need time to talk about and work with them in the same way. And that because we work in academia with university pressures and fund, all of the things that we know about the neoliberal university and research system, they were like, we've got 6 weeks. We have to go from the social workers to the end to the project. I was like, well, you can't be using drama to do that. You need to find a different way to do it, because it just cannot happen in that space of time.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're talking about reminds me of the importance of the witness in this work. Not just being audience in the regular sense. We've got the word spectator and spectator as a different kind of active presence. But I think the idea of witness, in which there is a gravitas to being present for the listening process and attending process, and what you're pointing to in terms of how to engage the facilitation of this process is knowing that this capacity to be present is not just to execute something.
Yeah.
And the work that you're talking about allows for a very deep sense of sensing what's going on.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's changing as you observe the process, the ways in which you're engaging with people? And as a researcher who is looking into multiple contexts and multiple kinds of theatre making, theatre responding even, what's changing as we move into the second quarter of the 21st century? I was reminded recently. I thought, oh yeah, that's true.
True and alarming. Yes.
Yeah, true and alarming. But yeah, what's shifting, especially from your point of view as a researcher, looking across different projects that you're involved in, but also in your role in RIDE, for example, and as editor, you're looking at a range of different things
Yeah.
coming in, different kinds of
Uh,
scholarship.
That's a great and actually really complex question, because as a knee-jerk reaction, I want to say not enough. Not enough is changing. Um, I think particularly if we talk about as an editor of RIDE, um, I'm really aware that authors, academics, readers, students, interested people in the global south can't always access the work that we're producing because the paywalls are are too high to scale for institutions, universities, and for individuals. And that needs to change. That needs to shift. Um, I think the cognitive aspect of cognitive justice in the publishing world and in the research world is shifting, I think, in a really positive way. I think practice research, or practice as research, as a myriad of terms for it, is beginning to puncture some of that. The written word is the all powerful thing, and that's very positive and very it's an amazing thing, really. It's taken too long to get there, but it's not far enough. Like it's very hard to publish a practice research thing. I don't want to say artifact,
Yeah,
but in RIDE, because RIDE comes back to the written word. So
yeah.
it's possible to do a photo essay, perhaps, but it's still it. So the ways we think about knowledge are beginning to change, but they're not
Mm.
changing fast enough, and that's quite a slow process. Open access, I mean, lots of countries and nations and individual publications and institutions are trying to move towards a sense of open access, but that's so that everybody can access everything for free. But that's a really complex term. Publishers
Mm.
aren't
Mm.
necessarily very interested in that. They're
Mm.
interested in it on one level, but then they want to know where the money comes from
Mm.
so they can exist as publishers. So that's a tricky dynamic. And so academia and research, whether it's practice research or more traditional research, is still behind closed doors and behind gates. And I don't think that we need to shift that. And that's a long-term goal, and we need to group together, particularly in subject areas and disciplines where we're working directly with people, and we're attempting to do a people-centered approach and move towards whatever we call it, cognitive justice or emancipatory research, or all of those things. We have to fight harder for that. So that's a really tricky area of change. I think there's been a huge shift in the last 10 years to Indigenous research methods and
Mm.
Indigenous practices being
Mm.
brought more, I don't really want to say into the mainstream, but making serious headways into how research is done and how people think about it and how people explore things. And that's a really positive move. So that's a definite shift. If I was talking about working with my community as co-researchers when I started this work 20 years ago, everyone would have gone, what do you mean co-researchers? You're doing
Mm.
participatory methods with a community group. Now people don't bat an eyelid. They understand what it is. So
Mm.
that's a really positive move.
Yeah,
That's really great.
yeah.
Um, the world around us in the work has changed so much, and the change is rapid and at a frightening speed. But nobody takes time to make changes, to think about things. I feel in many ways that we're going backwards, not forwards. I
What
think
particular change are you thinking about there?
Political change, I think, I don't want to highlight necessarily specific places or policies, but hard-won fights for feminist fights, for example, that have taken decades of dedicated, committed, predominantly women, but with support of some men, fighting for important change, for equality, and some of that is being rolled back. I think, by states. I think exactly the same with there's the backlash in the UK. I'm not sure it's the same term for other people, but wokeism is being weaponized as being a bad thing, and that we're too woke, when actually the principles behind that are about equity, equality, divisions of power, that are fundamentally important to the drama education, applied theatre world, and well beyond that, obviously. And I feel that's being changed, that's being rolled back in a way. I feel in that respect we're going backwards rather than forwards. I think there's more segregation rather than unity and solidarity across nations than there's ever been before. And I think that there's a multitude of reasons for all of that. But I might have been more positive about the direction society was going in 10 years ago than I am now. I could see we were making, in my eyes, what I thought was a positive moves towards some of the ideals and goals and social justice. And I feel that some of those are being snatched away, and we are going to have to retread ground if we can, and re-establish those principles that are being erased in practice and in law. And I think that's a major concern at the moment, and gives a bigger space, a bigger space for this type of work. If we get if we're allowed, if the funding continues, that I know researchers and academics in various different places where projects that they had funded for, let's just randomly say, climate change or climate justice, where they were being healthily funded to explore those things, have now had that funding taken away. Talking to colleagues in South Africa recently, the changes to international funding means that a lot of the NGOs who were doing great work with grassroots communities is no longer funded. And so and so all of that puts us in a darker, more dystopian world that I'd hoped that we were moving towards.
Yeah. So all the more to think about what sustains a practice, like your practice, thinking about how you began and what is it about theatre and drama that drew you in, and then you've been able to keep going, which I think is important to also recognize amidst the rather painful realities that we also have to contend with.
Yeah. I'm not a scientist. Certainly not a physicist. I can't change the world. I can't change the world full stop. But my contribution isn't about numbers, facts, science. I'm predominantly an art maker, a theatre maker. That's how I started many years ago as a drama teacher and as a youth theatre director. And that's my skill set. And so it's the only skill set I've got that I can use. Like I don't, that's I think I've described it as my weapon. That's not a good terminology in today's world.
Tool, perhaps.
My tool. Yeah, my tool.
Instrument is the other
possibility. Yes, exactly that. Much better. Although not the instrument, or not the instrument.
No, not instrumentation.
No, let's. But playing instrument. Right. Yes, absolutely that. And so that's the only recourse I've got. And I think if you, I think it's joy, actually. And I wouldn't have necessarily known that. So complex. If I think about the India work, and that's a really good place to locate it, because it's been so long. When we started, it was a pilot project and we didn't know if it would work, and we called it this pilot exchange to see what would happen if we got 20 young people who live in an informal housing settlement in India together with as many drama students as I could get in one space. So I was bringing the drama students, Divya was bringing the young people from Dharavi, and we didn't know what would happen. And what we watched happen in that room was joyous. The exchanges that happened in that room were wonderful. The theatre wasn't great, I'll be honest. The theatre was okay, but it wasn't brilliant. But the exchanges that happened in that room and the things that those two groups of young people taught each other was amazing. to me in that moment. And that was quite a draw. The relationships that developed between those young people was a draw. And so they did the second year of the pilot project, and we were like, well, it might not work, it's a different group of people. And it wasn't really a different group of people. The students were different, but the young Mumbaians were not, lots of them were not different. They were exactly the same people. And the Mumbai young people kept saying, will you come next year? Will you come next year? And that's like, oh, okay, why? What? And so they were clearly enjoying the process and getting something out of that process that I couldn't articulate at that time, but they wanted it to happen. And so we continue. We still call it a pilot project 23 years later. Will it work this year? I don't know. Is it the right thing to do? I don't know. But the people wanted it and were having fun in the room and talking about issues that were important to them. I mean, serious, hardcore issues in some cases that were important to them, and that they didn't feel they had a space to vocalize. That became that was a hook. It was a real hook. They were getting something out of it. I was learning so much. The students learned so much that was a real hook at the beginning. And I hadn't thought about it in those terms. But after about 10 years, we did a series of interviews with the young people in India that had returned and returned and returned and returned. They were not so young by this point in time.
Yeah.
They were definitely not so young.
Yeah.
And they were really articulate about why they kept, unsurprisingly, why would they not be, but about why they kept coming back. And one of them said in an interview, I kept coming back because you were interested. People traveled halfway around the world to ask me what I thought about things. Nobody had, you were prepared to make that commitment. And so I needed to meet you in that commitment. And so that was the listening side of things. So that he felt that he had been listened to by people who had no reason to listen to him. And when he was very clear about the people who live next door or the people in the school down the road, he didn't feel listened to. And I'm very flippant about this. It's never going to change the world because it can't. But if that one person had joy, or that group of 20 young people had joy and had fun and wanted it to continue, then therefore it should continue. I've often thought about, should it, what right have I got to be there or doing this work? But as long as the people that I'm working with want it to happen and they're finding benefit and finding joy and a space to talk about the things that are difficult in their lives, then that's got to be a positive thing. And so I've kept doing it, not easily. There have been lots of times where I've gone, oh, this is too hard. Funding wise, commitment wise, in all sorts of ways. But I guess on a very personal and selfish, and it is very personal and selfish, the joy I feel when I watch their performances, that I've watched them and been part of a crafting process, is great. And I'm not altruistic. I need something out of this practice for myself, and and that sharing moment is great. It's just wonderful to see people work, really to see the fruits of their labor, to see like, and it's hard work, don't get me wrong. It's like we're talking about the joy and the anger, but in between those two spaces it's blooming hard work for them and for us. But that's really lovely. I think I would not be the researcher, the published academic, or the practitioner, whatever that means, that I am, without those people on the journey, without the Indian young people that I worked with originally, without the first group of people I worked with in a prison and continue to work with, without the young people in London. I have learned so much from working with those people, and so much about how I think about the world and how I write about the world, and the theories that I'm drawn to directly come from that experience. So on one level, as an academic and a researcher, I'm drawn to it because I couldn't be as like I couldn't write as strongly. I'm not saying I write strongly, but I couldn't produce the written work that I do without those people. They're very much part of my journey. And some people might come into a session and go, oh, this is not for me, and go away. But that's also really okay. Some people don't, and they come back year after year, week after week, hour after hour. And so long as they're So long as the people that I work with are benefiting in some way, my co-director is benefiting in some way, and I am, then it's a win-win. And that actually that's how Divya would describe it. Divya would say it has to be win-win. It's
Okay.
not win-win, we're not doing it. And he's
Okay.
100% right. There has to be a win for everybody. And seeing the smiles on people's faces and the joy they feel when they step off the stage, or we very rarely have a stage, when when they
The
move behind a group
space.
of people
The
in the
space.
space,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah. And what you said earlier in relation to how it must intertwine with the anger, with the struggle, with the difficulty, for that joy to have the kind of depth that you seem to be talking about, right? It's not an easy thing to come by. It's been
Mm,
earned, as you say, it's hard
mm,
work, but
mm,
also it's been felt deeply and kind
mm,
of worked through with other people, that the exchange that you're talking about.
yeah,
And something about what you're saying is also making me think that people come with a sense of their own purpose getting
yeah,
honed, yeah,
yeah,
along the way. And
yeah,
what you're saying about what it is for you, it's the hope, it's the joy, it's the purpose, it's the connection, but also then the exchange of that experience that allows
yeah.
the whole process, the work, the gathering, the coming together to.
Where I see that most sharply is there's a project in New York with New York police officers and community groups run by Irondale Theatre, the Irondale Ensemble, that brings together police officers, New York police officers, to talk about their lived experience of policing the community, and the community to talk about their lived experience of being policed
Wow.
by the police. And that anger in
Yeah.
that room
Yeah.
is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's palpable, it's expressed, it's shouted, it's rage often
Yeah.
from both groups, from the
Right.
police force and they both describe it as every time they leave their house, it feels like they're going to war. They put
Mm.
on their and they talk about it in really combative terms.
Mm.
And over a 10-week period with a very, very skilled director and his skilled team, Terry Griss, they will work through moments of joy. They will have
Mm.
laughter. They will have
Mm.
really, really tough conversations and conflict with each other. And
Mm.
then on the drop of a hat, a drop of a coin or a pin, Terry will swoop in and go, "That's a really important discussion, but now we're going to play Zip Zap Boing," or whatever it is. And the people in that room, because again, it's time. It's about relationship. It's about listening to each other. It's about crafting that into a performance of some sort. They will go from really full-on aggressive debate, argument,
Mm.
conflict into singing a song
Mm.
and into having joyous, raucous laughter where there is a bonding happening between both sides through
Yeah.
that experience of exploring that anger and that rage
Yeah.
and then having joyful moments together. It's not going to fix the problems
Yeah.
long term, but in that moment in that room, you really feel the joy and the anger and the rage coming together in a way that then creates a curiously interesting performance.
Mm. And that dynamic of knowing, it may not change the big system overnight, certainly, but nonetheless, it is worthwhile because then within their scope of understanding and listening and paying attention to each other, it humanizes something
Yeah,
profound, right? In
yeah,
terms of just people who are seen as objectified in very negative
yeah.
ways, are humanized.
Yes, and the participants from both sides of that project describe it in very similar terms.
Mm.
They will in the moment say that they have seen the other side as human beings and not just a
Mm. Mm.
emotionless wall. Um, yeah, how long that feeling stays and permeates the rest of their lives is up for debate. But if it punctures it even for a moment, then that's got to be a positive thing.
Yeah, it is indeed. One final question. What are you observing in your students? Because that's another big part of what you're doing as an educator at
Yeah,
Central, and what's emerging there as they respond to this world and this sphere of work that they are choosing to get into.
yeah. Um, I'm seeing a more and more global classroom, which is
Mm,
a positive thing. So
mm,
the mix of students is hugely international, which is an absolute joy. Um, I'm seeing I'm seeing a bubble of students who live in, we all live in bubbles of people we choose to meet with and talk with. So the students I teach are predominantly from a bubble that thinks very positively about drama and theatre and very keen to tackle injustice in all its
wow.
forms.
Yeah.
So I definitely still see that. But I think a major shift for me is that they're much more vocal about that when they come
Mm,
in to the
mm,
institution.
mm,
They're much more knowledgeable
mm,
about what they see as injustice and where the wrongs in their world are and how they want to right them. Every young person always thinks that they're the first person to want to move the needle, as they say in the States. Um, but I see more of a commitment to that, which is
mm,
interesting. I see
mm,
more passion attached to it, but not only that, I see the words attached to it. So they come in, again, I'm going to use military words, which isn't good. They come in armed before they start their studies
mm,
with words and rhetoric surrounding injustice, which has definitely shifted since COVID, really. I
mm,
would say since the year of COVID lockdown, and I
mm,
guess that's because the TikTok explosion, the social media explosion,
mm,
if you were in the right bubble of those spaces, was
mm.
exactly asking questions about injustice and power imbalances, and so that's a very positive thing. Um, I see more reliance on AI with my students,
Yes. And we will see more.
and we will see more.
And we will see more. And I think we've just begun to get into what that might even bring
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
but I'm quite outspoken about this. I think it needs to be embraced. I think we need to be teaching our students at whatever level, primary level, right through to master's level, PhD students, how to use AI ethically
Yeah.
in their lives, in their workplaces, how it can be used as a tool for they need to be educated about its biases, and they're not even unconscious biases, its
Yeah.
biases,
Yeah.
and think ethically about how it can be used and how it can be useful to them and to the world at large. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction in academia in particular where people go, no, we have to ban it. Well, that's
Mm,
impossible.
mm.
We
It
can't
is
ban it.
impossible. Mm,
And actually, we're doing our students a huge disservice not
exactly.
to allow them to explore and to think about how it can be used in their professional life, because people are going to. And
Yeah.
in the same way as nearly everything else in the world, those students and young people who are more marginalized in all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of different ways will be the people that don't have access to it unless we infiltrate it, unless we incorporate it into our teaching. They won't experience it. They won't have access to it. They won't have access to computers and all of those things and to learn how to use it. And they'll be further disadvantaged than they already
Mm-hmm.
are. So I actually see it as our duty as educators to think about how we can incorporate it in ethical ways to all of our teaching.
Yeah. Agree with you totally there. I think it's a good point at which to come to a close, and we'll continue this conversation with Kelly and Molly.
Right.
Once again, thank you, Selina, for articulating why it matters to still examine utopian approaches to making art and living with hope in what feels like a dystopian contemporary moment. I'll certainly think further about joy as resistance and the importance of making time to party. We look forward to your next book. Thank you all for listening. You're invited to also listen to the dialogues with Kelly Freebody and Molly Mullen, and the joint dialogue where we come together to explore ideas as a group. These are all available on the NIE Care website.